there. It's great to feel like the city is so alive. And I'm particularly excited about tonight's program because I feel like, we're in New York City and it's a very global place, and this conversation is one that I think is near and dear to all of our hearts, but also is about the global world we're living in. I'm assuming that all of you have seen Mirror Image, A Transformation of Chinese Identity. So throw your hands up if you have. Okay, if you haven't yet seen the exhibition, I just want you to know it will be up through December. There are 19 artworks curated by the wonderful Barbara Pollack, who you'll meet in a minute, who's right here, but by 7 artists born in mainland China in the 1980s and reflecting the dramatic economic, political, and cultural shifts artists have experienced in China during their lifetimes. And it's very different than the exhibition we did, I don't know, almost 20 years ago, Inside Out. So it's particularly important to us to have a new series of voices from curators of today. And we're really thankful that all of you have made time to be here with us. I just wanted to mention, my name is Rachel Cooper, and I'm here at Asia Society working under the auspices of, or the framework of Asia, of culture as diplomacy. So in a way, that's very relevant to what we're doing now, because I have the strong belief that you can't really have connection unless you understand culture. And that's what's so important about, I think, the work at this institution. Because we have a policy institute, but it's the cultural side that I find is so vibrant and that lasts beyond the transactional. So I'm always promoting that side of our work. Just very briefly mentioning a couple of upcoming programs. The Last Girl Awards will be on Monday. We'll have Ruchita Gupta, who's from Apnea Up, which is a group against sex trafficking. We'll have Gloria Steinem, Ruby Sales, Chloe Flowers, among others here on Monday. Tuesday, we have Reza Aslan here with his new book, An American Martyr in Persia, with Jad Abiran, it's a new book, and it's really it again takes culture and gives you a sense of a historical moment that reflects on the Iran of today. And if we look at what's going on in Iran, history matters, and it's recontextualized for a new generation. And so tonight, I'm really delighted to introduce Barbara Pollack, who will introduce the panel. And Barbara, as I mentioned, is the curator of the exhibition, but she's done an amazing amount of work. She's an independent curator, arts writer, educator, living here in New York, a leading expert on Chinese contemporary art, the author of Brand New Art from China, A Generation on the Rise, The Wild Wild East, An American Art Critic's Adventures in China. And in March 2020, she co-founded Art at a Time Like This, a platform for free expression for artists in crisis. As a curator, Pollack has organized numerous shows among a younger generation of Chinese artists, and she is the guest curator of Asia Society's exhibition. And again, I encourage all of you to see it for those of you who haven't. So join me in welcoming Barbara. And for those of you, one last thing. Those of you who are watching online, I want to welcome you to also send in your questions. We'll have the panel, and then we'll have this mic set up over here so that you can ask your questions, and we can make this as interactive as possible. So thank you all so much, and please, Barbara.
Hello, I'm not going to speak very long because I'm really just introducing the young curators, thought leaders who will be speaking tonight. But I just wanted to say something, that the show is called Mirror Image because the whole time I was working on the show and the whole time I've been researching this generation of Chinese artists, which goes back to 2012, I was acutely aware of my own cultural biases. And so, like that I have biases coming to Chinese art, which is inescapable for anybody who grew up in America, where Nixon going to China was like the first time you heard of the country, that when the only way I could deal with balancing my own biases was to work continuously with young artists and curators from that generation. I had a young curator in Beijing who opened doors for me all over the place and introduced me to her friends who are now some of the leading artists of that generation. And for this show, I worked with Hong Zhang, and he was invaluable in terms of reaching out to artists in the middle of the pandemic to secure the works for this show and keeping up relations with people who were in China or where the correspondence needed to be in Chinese and where we were discussing delicate matters given everything that's going on in terms of the internet, email, WeChat at this time. Han was a real find for me. I saw him and I said, he has to work for me. Han holds an MA from the Institute of Fine Arts, NYU, and a BFA from Parsons. Han co-founded IFA Contemporary Asia, the first Pan-Asian art forum at NYU. They are an independent curator and research assistant for the Matthew Barney Studio. And they have curated several recent shows, both here and in China, that were eye-opening to me. And so it has been nothing but a dialogue between us in making this show come together. And I really respect their point of view and the point of view of all the artists and young curators and gallery dealers who contributed to my research. And without that, the show would not have been possible. So I'm letting Han take over and welcome everyone tonight. Thank you for participating. And thank you all for coming here today, a day when traffic had to be tied up on the Upper East Side. So thank you.
Thank you, Barbara, for the wonderful introduction. I'm going to give a brief introduction of our three panelists here. From my left-hand side is Yiwei Lu. Yiwei Lu is a Los Angeles-based curator, gallerist, filmmaker, and a writer. She was born and raised in China. At the age of 18, she moved to Los Angeles and attended Loyola Marymount University to study film production and photography. She also has a master's degree in visual anthropology at the University of Southern California. In 2021, she established Yiwei Gallery at Abercrombie Boulevard in Venice Beach. As a curator, Lu strives to highlight the works of international and female artists, photographers, and multimedia creative through out-of-the-box approaches. Additionally, Lu is a column writer for two art magazines. One is Chinese Photographers, the other one is Chip Photo Video. And in the middle is Phil Cai. Phil Cai graduated from Sotheby's Institute of Art with a master's degree in 2014. She has held posts at Marybone Gallery and Phillips Auctioneers, and is currently a partner at Eli Klein Gallery, focusing on contemporary Chinese art, where he has presented solo exhibitions for artists such as Cai Dongdong, Shun Fan, Li Hongbo, and Ji Zhou, among others. He has also curated critically acclaimed group exhibition, including most recently Alienation, in 2021. Phil also works in the domain of art criticism and translation of texts on philosophy. He has authored a number of exhibition reviews for Walls magazines, and his most recent critical text, Everything Can Become an NFT, Isn't It? Is It True? Was published by New York Times Tea Magazine, China. His translated book, The Story of Philosophy, was published by Shanghai Yuandong Press in 2020. Last but not the least is Amy Kahng. Amy Kahng is a PhD candidate in art history and criticism at Stony Brook University. Her dissertation project examines 20th century Asian American artists and their relationship to land and landscape. Other research interests include global contemporary art, modern and contemporary art in Korea, and transnational feminist art practice. Her MA thesis centered on South Korean artist Lee Bo's practice from the 1990s. Amy is an independent curator and recently exhibited Myth/Communication, Language and Power in Contemporary Art and Printing, Solidarity, Tricontinental Graphics from Cuba. She is currently working on an exhibition revisiting Frank Bowling's historic 5+1 exhibition at Stony Brook University. Please have a warm welcome to our three amazing curators. Thank you. I'm just going to dive right into my first question. Can each one of you start with a story about your recent curatorial projects and what has been the biggest challenge that you have faced, and what do you think that you could have done better? Maybe we'll start with Phil.
Sure. Well, thank you for introducing me, and it's an absolute pleasure to be here. Thank you for Asia Society, and it's great to do a panel talk here with fellow great curators and in conjunction with Barbara's wonderful show. So the most recent show that I wanted to highlight is Alienation ? It's actually a show that I've done at the gallery with 10 contemporary Chinese artists actually living in the US. So the title of the show, Alienation, is really the core concept of it in a way that it's a intersection of 3 different streets, I would call them. So the first street is, as Chinese Americans, we're actually aliens. So alienation, when you divided it into 2 words, it's actually a nation of aliens. And on the other hand, it's a philosophical concept of alienation. When we overwork ourselves, we started to get alienated with our products, and at the same time, it's an alienation process with a society. And at the same time, the third sort of street is during the pandemic, because the show was done in 2021, it's during the pandemic. So how the pandemic actually, you could argue, accelerated or altered that very process of alienation. So that's the concept of the show. And like I said, it's a group show of 10 Chinese contemporary artists living in the US. And when it comes to the biggest difficulty, dealing with China, there's always logistical difficulties, which I can easily highlight, such as time difference, shipping. But there is an undermined one that I really wanted to talk about, is the synergy between artists. This is something I learned myself as a brand new thing during the curatorial process of this exhibition. When you come in as a curator, this mastermind of yours wanted to just plan everything out. This goes here, those two aesthetically go terrifically together. Those are conceptually consistent, so they go together on this wall. But at the same time, I later come to a realization that when we tackle the research of this very show you're doing, you're coming in from the now history in a way that you're tackling history from now. You're learning it in the books, in the research materials, but there's this level of then history that's missing. So when I talked to some of the artists in the show, 3 of them actually practiced in Shanghai in the 90s. They had a deep bonding between each other. And that's something you just couldn't tell by just researching historical books and look at the art itself. You have to have a dumpling party with them and just really bond with them and pass yourself onto the then, into the 90s in Shanghai, to really experience the deep bonds that's underlied between those works. So that's one of the things I wanted to talk about, and it's an absolutely learning process for myself as well.
Would you consider that as one of the challenge?
Yes, absolutely, because it ruined my initial exhibition plan.
Okay.
But it turned out to be a better one, at least I think.
What do you think that you could have done better for the show?
Is to really take that thing that I just talked about into consideration.
The then history.
The then history, not just, well, the now history is important, and each art historian would agree, but the then history is also important, just to push ourselves into the history, and just to experience with them.
Thank you for leading with such a great answer. Amy, would you like to follow?
Yeah, sure. A recent exhibition that I worked on was at the All Foundation in their new space in Harlem. If you're not familiar with the All Foundation, they are most known for giving grants to Korean diasporic artists. And so they had been based in Chelsea for a long time, and they're opening this like fantastic new space in Harlem. And so I was asked to curate an exhibition, you know, to, I guess, launch their new exhibition space. And I think what I came up with was I selected 4 artists who either live or work in Upper Manhattan or reflect on Upper Manhattan and the Harlem area. And so 2 artists ended up being Korean artists, and then, or Korean diasporic artists, and then 2 artists were, there was one black artist who was based in Harlem, and one Latinx artist based in Upper Manhattan. And I think one of the challenges for that was, you know, the All Foundation has this long history in Chelsea, and I was really concerned about or thinking about what it means for this space, this like, you know, this really important, you know, supportive Korean space. Like, what does it mean for it to be in Harlem in this new community? And how can we, or how can I think about, you know, what are the connections across, you know, racial solidarities? What is the kind of Asian American history that exists in Harlem, and what, you know, which Korean artists are already working there or thinking about that area. So I guess that was, you know, one of these challenges I was trying to figure out, and I don't know if the solution ended up being the most graceful or successful, but it was, I think, a really great learning experience, and I really appreciated working with the All Foundation, people who were really supportive.
Sounds amazing. The concept of intersectionality was probably very important in your curatorial
Yeah, absolutely.
practice.
Yeah. Intersectionality and just like cross-racial solidarities. You know, it's not, you know, Asian Americans, you know, fighting for resources against other racial groups, but we're all, you know, here under oppression, you know, fighting for the same things.
Great. Yiwei, what's your recent curatorial projects that you would like to talk about?
First of all, thank you for inviting me. I feel really honored to be here today. I flew in from California on Tuesday because I think this kind of conversation is so important. And thank you, Asia Society, to host this kind of conversation. It's really valuable to me. The most recent curatorial experience I did is with the actor and painter Billy Zing. I curated his exhibition at Speedy Gallery at Bergman Station, Santa Monica. It's in display right now. But the most recent Asian artist experience I curated was earlier this year. It's an exhibition called Natural Women, and we featured 4 women artists, Sassy from Thailand, Moeko from Japan, Ruby from China, and Charlie from Oregon, Portland. It's the reason why it's called Natural Women is that all artists deal with natural materials or natural elements. For example, Moeko paints with salt, and Sassy uses live moss in her sculptures. So as you can see already, like, there is a lot of requirements for the air, the condition, and the environment. That posed a lot of challenges. And also, at that time, I was dealing with a really small space, and my natural instinct is that, like, because it's a small space, I need to get some smaller work. So I acquired about like 60 to 7 pieces of artwork, and they're all smaller works. It was really hard to display them in a smaller space, and I was trying to find the unity showing them. So my solution was painting the background walls into different colors, but all earth tone. So this way we can differentiate the artists, but also they're in one unity. It looked really great. We received a lot of good press in Los Angeles. But if one thing I could have done better is that I think I would have liked having more bigger pieces. Back then, I wasn't feeling very comfortable curating a really small space, and I thought if we just do if we do bigger works, it will make people feel really crowded. But now I actually like the feeling of like crowding the space and making people feel it's really immersive. So I have more confidence curating in the smaller space now.
Well, you should move to New York space are very small. I have a follow-up question. Do any one of you have a signature or personalized curatorial style? Phil?
Sure, I'll go first. I have a deep interest in philosophy, so my style is usually more philosophically driven. And to me, I believe good art or good contemporary art requires a certain level of abstraction. Now, I'm not talking about abstraction in a style of painting term, but a way that you're taking a pool of information, you're really abstracting on something that applies to everything, and then with the exhibition, it can be re-put down into that pool and be reapplied to everything else. So this is the beauty of having the curatorial process, and that's very similar to an artist's practice. As you know, artists require this level of abstraction, and so do curators. So something I wanted to talk about on this topic is how tall of how high of an abstraction I wanted to give to my exhibitions. And my personal rule of thumb is to give it 7 foot. 7 foot is the exact height that a general public, someone from the general public, would be able to reach, not by just standing, but by trying to reach out, tiptoe, or do a little jump. So that's, to me, a sweet spot, especially for many curatorial practices. Barbara's great show, for example, down there, I would say it's in that sweet spot. It's a 7 feet curatorial show. Because for the general public, when they make that attempt to read the text, to understand the works, to understand the culture behind it, you make that attempt to leap or to tiptoe, you would think it's, wow, absolutely stunning. And it's not extremely, it doesn't cut too many people out. But on the other hand, the other two approaches do have their beauties as well. I would say just, on top of my head, Louis Bourgeois' show at the Jewish Museum that was purely on Jacques Lacan's psychoanalysis. And that's a very highly abstracted show. It got some pretty tough reviews, but to me it was a brilliant show. The thing is, it's really cutting a lot of people off who didn't know Lacan's writings and Bourgeois' practices. But at the same time, you have the super worldly shows that can be accessed to basically anyone, and there's beauty on that as well. So my interest in finding my future practice is really to find that balance in between, what kind of, what level of abstraction is required to whichever subject matter I'm dealing with.
You should coin that 7 feet show.
I should pattern that, yeah.
Yeah, you should.
Your next book.
Amy?
Yeah, I love that response. Very philosophical metaphor. It's great. I don't know. So I see my curatorial practice as, I guess, having like 2 different parts. Like one part is very like research oriented. I look at historical works and think about digging deep into this history and kind of contextualizing it for now. And then another part of my practice is looking at very contemporary artists and working with a lot of younger artists. And with that part, I guess something that goes across the board is I really value and think it's really important to spend time with artists and like create these relationships and try to understand, where are they really coming from? What is it that they're trying to get across in their work, and just really wanting to be considerate and thoughtful about, how am I putting their work alongside other artists or artworks? And yeah, so the relationship to the artist, I think, is really important for me.
Great. Yiwei.
I would say social media.
Social media.
I think it's because I'm part of this millennial people who like grew up with social media, and also I came from a film production background. I'm not afraid of social media. I love social media. It's a great tool to have. And at my gallery, every time we curate a show, I love to like just document everything that's happening, and I post all of them, I edit them, and I let my audience know what is happening behind the scene. A lot of galleries post installation photos, and they all look really neat, but I post photos that are messy, that are dirty. You can see me and my artists being at the gallery at 12 a.m. bare feet or on the ladder with shoes. I think it's really important to reveal that part of curating and installation, and just let people know what is happening at a gallery.
And you have some kind of instant feedback.
Exactly, yeah. And I mean, I think younger generation they're all on social media. Why don't we just use this powerful tool to let more people get to know what is happening?
Great. My next question is tailored to Amy. I graduated from the Institute of Fine Art. I see some of my alumni here. And I took a course in curatorial strategy. We were lucky enough to talk to a lot of chief curators in major museums in New York City. One of the frequently asked questions is that, do I need a PhD in order to be in an institutional curatorial team? A lot of the chief curators say no, but the reality is that if you don't have a PhD, you can barely be considered. So I wonder if that's the case in your situation as a PhD candidate.
I mean, well, firstly, like, we'll see, I guess, when I go on the job market, how it ends up working out.
Shout out to Asia Society.
Yeah.
Need a curator.
Yeah, in a couple years, I'll be around. But I think the people I see getting jobs the most are people who, after their undergrad, maybe they got a master's or maybe not, and they worked a lot in the museum field or curating shows or trying to kind of gain a lot of experience. And then when they started their PhD program, they already had, some major institutional position that they had. And I say like major institutional, maybe as a curatorial assistant or something like that. And then during their PhD, maybe tried to continue working. And then once they were done, they were like ready to be, a curator at a major institution. And so I feel like that's kind of the trajectory I've seen from museum curators that's like been the most successful. I think, for me, I didn't really have that kind of track. And so I think I'm trying to make up for it in some ways by trying to curate shows while I'm in school and just trying to not, I guess, isolate myself from this sort of like practice community and from, exhibiting work. Because it is really easy, I think, to like, as a PhD student to be in this kind of scholarly world and, separate yourself from the museum community. But I think that's like I guess, what I would say about trying to get a job as a scholar or something like that.
Great. Institution does have its bar, and sometimes it's very high up. But I started curating simply by building a website. So look, I'm here. Next question is for Phil. You are the partner of Eli Klein Gallery, one of the most important contemporary Chinese art gallery in New York City. What would you consider as the biggest advantage or disadvantage curating Asian art coming from such a gallery setting?
I would say the biggest advantage is my deep understanding towards Asia and China. I was born and raised in Shanghai, came to the US for education when I was 18, and stayed in the art ever since. And I would say the disadvantage is exactly that as well. I think Barbara touched on it a little bit in her opening speech, that there's this certain misconception between what we made of Chinese contemporary or Asian contemporary and what it actually is. So here comes the difficulty. I wanted to use a really cheap food analogy here. Everyone here probably have tasted Sichuan spiced chicken, the fried chicken that's a little spicy and tastes really good. The Chinese restaurant here in New York. So that's just advertising how Asian food tastes like and the phenomenology of it. But most of you probably wouldn't know the story behind it, or not just the story, but the philosophy behind it. Let me talk on food just a little bit before I talk about art. So in China, in this kind of weather, autumn, right? There's a term called 鸡秋膘, meaning you accumulate autumn fat. That's not just on the food level, but that's on deep philosophical level. That's your relationship of coexisting with the nature, how you deal with the nature. It's almost in between a human and a bear, where you hibernation and you accumulate a lot of autumn fat. So, I wanted to apply this analogy to art in a way that lots of people are, just getting a taste of how Asian art would look like, or even stereotyping into how they should look like. But the difficulty is really at what they actually is and what the culture is that's behind it.
Have you been accumulating some autumn?
Well,
I
hope
haven't seen
not.
you for a month, but I think I can tell. Okay. Yiwei, this question is for you. You are famous for your pop-up exhibitions, and I think pop-up exhibition has become more of a hip idea only very recently in New York because of COVID has happened, and a lot of gallery space has become very cheap. But you're from the West Coast. Do you see a significant difference in between the curatorial strategy in comparison, in between the pop-up exhibitions and traditional exhibitions? And do you have identified a difference between the West Coast style and the East Coast style?
First of all, I'm not famous, but thank you for that. I do love curating pop-up exhibitions. I started by curating pop-up exhibitions for 2 years until I opened my own gallery. But besides curating on my own gallery, I still curate outside my gallery, and I still do pop-up exhibitions all over LA. I think I did 3 pop-up exhibitions this year so far. I love it simply because you gain a really special connection with the artist because you work together very closely for a short amount of time, and it's very intense work. So you got to know the artist really well, and in this very intimate space, you gain intellectual and emotional relationship. So it gets really personal to me. I remember in one of my recent pop-up exhibitions I did with Zing, we were gonna do vinyl titles on the wall, but the vinyl letters didn't arrive. And that happens a lot to pop-up exhibitions. The turnaround's really short, and a lot of emergencies have to happen, and you just have to deal with them. So we went to Michael's and bought like wood block prints, and we were at the gallery in midnight wrapping them with yarn, and we were painting them. So we end up putting those letters on the wall as the title, and that's like what people comment about the first thing when they came to the gallery. So I felt really proud of that, and I just feel like it really helps me with my troubleshooting skills, and it really, it's just really special. But in terms of the difference between West Coast and East Coast, the scenes are really different, simply because I don't think there are a lot of us on the West Coast. I always feel like I'm on my own, and when I'm over here, I feel like there are more people I can talk to about the issues I would love to discuss about. So I do think there are more Asian gallerists, Asian dealers, and Asian artists working here, and I also see there's a tendency of people moving over to the West Coast. So I think the scene is growing there, and I have a lot of confidence on the West Coast market.
Amazing. Next question. Since the COVID outbreak, as you might know, that the anti-Asian racism has at an all-time high. According to New York PD, just in 2021, the anti-Asian hate crime jumped 361%. And I, unfortunately, is one of the victims. I would like to ask you, as the younger generation of Asian curators, do you think that we have this responsibility on our shoulder to utilize our curatorial skills in the form of activism? Amy, would you like to answer first?
Sure. I mean, I think, all art and all exhibitions are political. They're always, whether or not they're being political or not, there is a sort of underlying political message. And I think, as curators, I'm always thinking about how important it is to be, giving a platform or a space for artists who, need to have their narratives told, or not only just like, showing artists who I feel like, like Asian artists who are not shown as often, but also like being very thoughtful and taking the time to understand, like, why I'm showing these artists. So perhaps that's the kind of, I guess, like political activist bent that I think about in my practice.
Earlier, you mentioned that when you were curating for the show in Harlem, you think about racial unity. Maybe in a way that's a form of activism as well?
Yeah, I mean, I think I seek, or I try to be thoughtful about the space and, you know, who I'm showing, and wanting to be considerate about what it is that, you know, I'm showing, and not just kind of bringing whoever to show, like, you know, showing whatever with no, you know, consideration about how the artists are functioning together and what the space is that, you know, we're occupying. So I guess, yeah, in some ways that's a kind of activism too.
In my experience of curating Asian art, I have gotten some criticisms from my Asian friends who are not East Asians. In a lot of so-called Asian exhibitions, most of the time we are only centering East Asian artists. And Asians are not monolithic. We have so many different types of Asians. And I believe that I have personally, and I also have seen people, my colleagues, putting efforts to include more underrepresented Asian populations, Asian artists. Phil, do you have any take on it?
To me, it's a dilemma. The reason why Picasso's Guernica is in Reina Sofia is not only because he's painting bombers and tanks post-World War. There were never a lack of artists painting tanks and bombers after World War, just as there's never a lack of painters just painting masks and nurses as angels post the pandemic. The reason it's actually in Reina Sofia in its crown is it's Picasso's cubist painting it. So the point I'm trying to make is there's, of course, a responsibility for us to promote underrepresented Asian artists, not just East Asian, of course. But at the same time, I wanted to make it clear that the only motive for artists to create is I wanted to create. It's a holy relationship. And any social phenomenon that's going on, that's happening around us, should only be used as a catalyst, an impetus, or a spice to maybe steer your practice in a certain way, or to become the very material of your practice. But the practice itself shouldn't be hindered or shouldn't be twisted just by that. So to me, the valuation process is very, very important in a way that we can't just honorably accept any pure, sheer depiction of what's going on. And in my very honest opinion, most of them wouldn't be lasting. I wanted to select what's going to be lasting, the next, you know, hopefully Guernicas in Reina Sofia, or maybe in Asia Society here.
Amazing. Yiwei, what's your take on the social activism aspect of curating?
Continuing to showcase Asian artists is my form of activism. Before the pandemic, I was able to see a lot of Asian artists brought by Asian galleries in Los Angeles at different art fairs. And once the pandemic started, we all became very isolated. So I stopped seeing that, and I thought it would be better maybe like 2 years after. But no, I'm not seeing the same thing that I used to see, and that's actually part of the reason why I wanted to open my gallery. I think we need more space to showcase these artists.
Creating platforms for them. As I mentioned earlier, that I started my career as a curator from building a website, and that was during quarantine at the beginning of the COVID outbreak. And I thought that after the reopening of cities and countries, the online exhibitions would die down a little bit, but it's actually not dying down with the hyper marketings of NFTs and metaverse. Virtual exhibitions is still a very heated topic. I'm wondering if any one of you have a take on this, and as an Asian curator, do you think there is some kind of advantage that we can take? Phil?
Oh, sure. I've been very carefully optimistic on this new technology. And I've actually just published an essay on the New York Times Tea Magazine in China on the topic of, someone said, everything can be NFT'd. Is it true? So just to summarize what I wanted to say real quick, there are two main forces that's trying to penetrate into what's going on at the metaverse or at the NFT. One's the speculators, the financial speculators, and the second is the art people, is us. To me, an NFT art can only be considered a good NFT art. It has to be unique to the medium, meaning it should not work on any other medium. If you print it out, if you put it on the display, if you print it out as a JPEG on a movie, if it's conceptually exactly the same, then at this moment, I wouldn't most likely consider it good NFT art. Damien Hirst's currency, for example, regardless of what kind of reputation the studio has, but that's a good NFT art because he's only making it possible on the parallel existence of the metaverse and the real world. So that being said, I'm cautiously telling my artist friends to really think about, back to what I just said on the other question, the real practice, your practice should only be, I wanted to create. Whether it's a marketing incentive or a monetary incentive, it should be only secondary. So the bottom line is, I respect the artists that jump on this new trend as much as I respect the artists that choose not to after understanding it.
I agree that, I don't know if you guys remember, about a month ago, there was this NFT NYC week, and I was so irritated by looking at that crazy monkey every day. But besides that, I'm always so confused by the fact that if it's NFT, why are we showing it in iPads in exhibition space? Like, what's the point? And that echoes what Phil said, that if it's still materialized in a tangible fashion, can we really consider it as NFT? Yiwei, do you have any take on this?
I personally don't have any experience with curating digital shows, but I really think the pandemic has changed my way of working. People used to think that curators have to work on site, but I am curating 2 exhibitions currently. One is a photo fair in China, and one is an exhibition at a 500-year-old monastery in Italy. And obviously, I'm not there. My artists are not there. I'm working with the teams remotely. And I think it's been really, really great. For example, the exhibition coming up in Italy, it's at Casa Regis, which is a nonprofit organization at a little village 2 hours away from Milan. And during the pandemic, they reached out to me on Instagram, and they said, can you please bring some Chinese artists over here and curate a show here? And I was like, okay, that's great. I would love that opportunity, but I cannot be there. So my host there patiently gave me a blueprint of the building and gave me a tour of what the building is like, where we have a mural and where is the furniture, which part of the furniture is movable. And she just gave me a really, really thorough walkthrough. And I feel like I know what the building is like. And because we have all those fantastic technology, I'm able to just like put my artist's work over there on the computer, and I can visualize what it looks like. And all my artists there in China, they gave me pictures, JPEGs of their work, and I put them there. Of course, it would be better if I can see the work and see the location by myself. But I feel like because the internet, because the technology, because we're all used to working remotely now, we can all collaborate together. And I really appreciate this opportunity of working at a 500-year-old monastery, even though I'm not there.
I have a extremely similar experience. Online art organization, Deformal, one of the founders right here, invited me to curate an exhibition that is based in Italy, and of course I couldn't be there, so we really just cloud curated the whole show. Amy, do you have any?
Yeah, I mean, I think Yiwei said it really well. You know, the collaboration that's afforded with this kind of more, I guess, online kind of space, or the way that, you know, Zoom meetings have been normalized, have allowed for, I think, certain kinds of conversations or collaboration to happened that would have, maybe not happened, or maybe would have just been like kind of too challenging in the past. And I think that, it's easier in some ways also to be able to tap into and to have programs that, people from different places can attend. Like obviously, like we're live streaming this, and people in California or wherever are able to, see what conversation we're having. I think that's the kind of, takeaway or productive, outcome from this sort of more online aspect that's like kind of held over. In terms of like NFTs, I have no idea.
I work for 2 NFT startups, and I still don't have any idea. My next question, it's more of an academic-driven question. Contemporary Asian art, especially the criticizing and analyzing, curating of contemporary Asian art, is still very much following a Western canon. In my conversation with a professor whose name is Song Xiaoxia from the Central Academy of Art in Beijing, I asked her, do you think us Chinese curators and art scholars would one day develop our own discipline in terms of understanding and analyzing contemporary Asian art? Her answer wasn't very optimistic. She said that maybe not so possible in our lifetime. I wonder, Amy, maybe you would like to start as a scholar.
I think that, decentering a Western canon is really important. And, a lot of art history classes are focused on this like lineage of art history that's, Western European centric. I think that trying to build a canon or a methodology that's separate or different from that one is maybe not quite possible, just because of the way that artists are influenced by other artists. Art history has always been, and art making has always been like very global and very, a lot of exchange happening. So to make a canon that, or make a methodology that's like separate, I feel like is maybe a little bit futile, or a little bit, not quite the answer we're looking for. I also think that, making another canon centers another canon. And like you have mentioned, we get called out for not showing enough, South Asian, Southeast Asian artists or something like that. So to create another canon is also excluding other artists or excluding other kinds of art. And so I think just rather than trying to build something new, it should be about, trying to take down or disintegrate or, create new ways of thinking about canons and methodology that's not about creating a singular narrative.
What a great answer. Phil, do you have anything to add on?
Right. My answer is actually very similar to Amy's. That was very well said. Just coming from a Chinese art perspective, Gao-Ming Lu had this very good summary of Chinese contemporary art, is that we're really merging the hundreds of years of Western modernity into just 20 years of Chinese contemporary art. So I've heard people saying New York is the true melting pot. Well, I'll tell you, Chinese contemporary is the true melting pot. You're really getting this in the 70s and 80s, you're getting the sudden influx of Western influences, and artists were going everywhere, basically. So that really didn't help in terms of creating sort of quote unquote our own canon. But I'm carefully optimistic in a way that I think maybe the question shouldn't be carrying such a note of animosity, in a way that we should grab this power back and let's create. But it might be a co-create sort of future, in a way that we look at Hong Kong, right? It has been the center of Chinese or Asian in general art world for the past many decades. But now we're seeing people just going out of Hong Kong and relocating to Singapore, Malaysia, Thailand, Vietnam. Many of my friends look at this as a very negative thing, but I look at it as sort of an opportunity, or maybe a beginning of the new future. It's not the re-congregation, the re-centralization of a future we're talking about anymore. It is everywhere can have their own sprinkled around a mini center, or if you may, or a Harb for this internationally based art exchange. So we're in this moment, 2022, we should really treat difference not as a fact, but as the very object of discussion. So let's honor difference and let's just spread it out and have different places have their own voices.
I think your answer is a great segue to my next question, which is about censorship. It seems like when we talk about Asian art, censorship is an inevitable thing to consider, especially when I'm curating art exhibitions in China. I have experienced that either I have to remove the artwork from the show or I have to translate the name of the artwork. For example, there is this artist whose name is Xu Guanyu, and he is a queer photographer, but queer subject matters in China is still such a taboo. And the title of his series is called Temporarily Censored Home. Literally has the word censor in it. So when I have to translate the title, I really need to think about how can we kind of avoid being censored. So eventually the translation in Chinese is completely different from what the original thinking of this art. And also, I don't know if you guys remember this monumental exhibition at Guggenheim called the Theater of the World. In the beginning of even before the show was opened, it was facing a lot of criticism because in the show there were 3 artworks that involve animals, and that PETA wasn't happy about it. So eventually the works all 3 of them were censored. So censorship on Asian art not only exists internationally, it also exists domestically. I wonder if any of you have a take on this. Phil, do you have any?
Sure. When we talk about censorship here in the US, there's such a strong association with China, right? And I propose we use a new methodology here and step back from it a little bit. Maybe we can look at censorship as the verb to inhibit, right? But inhibition is omnipresent in not only the art world, but in the world. I've spoken to many artists studying in the U.S., maybe in New York, a lot of them. They would told me that sometimes they were almost forced, or usually it's the word recommended, to go into this. I'm a Chinese student, my work should automatically reflect my Chinese identity. Well, what if the talent of the student only lies in abstract painting, which doesn't go so well with the narrative of Chinese identity art? So what I'm trying to say is inhibition is really everywhere. And the good artists usually find a way, not necessarily around it, but to cohabit with it. And this relationship usually could turn into something that's really beautiful. Our mind, I would say it's like a tree, right? It can go whichever direction, and there are millions of opportunities. And if you erect a brick wall on one side of the tree wouldn't just go away and die. It would grow on the other direction. Some trees go over the wall. Some would even climb onto the wall and coexist with the wall. So I do think it is on the surface level an inhibition, censorship, but at the same time, we can look at it something as we live with and we work with. And echoing that Guggenheim show that you mentioned, Sun Yuan and Peng Yu, the very creative artist couple, actually they have 2 works on display at the gallery, and anyone's welcome to look at them. Sun Yuan gave me a really wonderful quote on this very topic that I wanted to share with you. There are 2 lines. The first line is, art is a tool to criticize. But the second line is, art is the critic of the tool. So the first part is really really easily censored. You can, if you block a subject matter, you cannot go that direction. But if we reflect on ourselves and look at the tool that we use to criticize, then this is almost impossible to be censored. And good artists, I would say many of them focus their practice on the second part, the critic of the tool. So that's my answer.
Thank you. You should be named the metaphor of the year. You're just so good at it. Yiwei, can you speak from the gallerist's point of view about censorship?
For sure, yeah. I think, Phil, you gave a great answer. And from my perspective, it's very similar. I work around the situation, but I like to push a little bit boundary, just a little bit. I like to be subtle. For example, the show I am curating in China for a photo fair, I'm curating for this one unit, which is international photography unit. I'm bringing my Brazilian artists, my Peruvian artists, my Kosovo artists, and a Parisian artist. Two of them work with nudity, and as we might all know, nudity is a little bit sensitive in China. So I just have to be a little bit more sensitive, working around choosing the words. Maybe I don't show the front part, but I can show the back. I still like to show the body of work as a full body of work. I still want the artist to convey what she wants to convey, but I also want to work around the rule because I don't want to pose any trouble to my partners in China and the show organizers. Also, when I'm bringing artists from China to here, I understand there are some boundaries there might be some difficulties for Western audience to understand. For example, in my last show, my photographer works around this traditional Chinese poem classics, poem collectives, Zing. So any Chinese audience will understand what that is. It's a 2,500-year-old poem collective. But I had to write an additional paragraph just to explain what it is. So in the artist's original text, he talked about it in 2 words, but I have to add in one whole another paragraph. So I think we just have to work around the condition. We want to show the work as authentic as it is. But we still want to have the audience understand. And at the same time, maybe we can push it a little bit boundary.
Amy?
Yeah, I think, when people talk about censorship in the U.S., they're not usually bringing up these examples like in China, but whenever there's an exhibition that's happening, there's always different stakeholders or different people who have power, whether that's donors or that's the estate of an artist or something like that, who are always wanting to have a certain kind of message or who are trying to prevent certain kinds of things from being exhibited, or they're trying to shape the story in some way. And so censorship exists in that way. I think also censorship in the US, I feel like is a word that can be used a little bit too often when it's not really the case. When sometimes in recent years there's been an exhibition where there was some kind of content that was seen as offensive in some way or something like that, and maybe people are using this word censorship around the curators taking down the work because it was hateful or whatever. But really, it's the curator's choice to show that work and to give the platform to those kinds of hateful things. The artist can make whatever they want, but the curator has the decision to put it up or not. And so being kind of encouraged or pushed to remove something, I don't see in that case as censorship, but really just exerting their power as deciding what should be platformed or not.
I think everybody is just so scared of the cancel culture. We tiptoe around things nowadays in order to just survive. I have a very last question. Why is it important to curate Asian art? Phil?
I'll just say one line for this, and I promise no analogies this time. It's important because instead of showing the world what Asian contemporary art appeared to be, or I wanted to show the world how Asian contemporary art, or how Asians and Chinese in particular think. That's what I have to say.
Great. Yiwei.
I think on the West Coast, I don't really know about the case here, but when I talk about Asian art with my friends there, they're still talking about materials like ceramics, ink, and those traditional media. And there are a lot of Asian artists who are working with new media today. There are a lot of Asian artists who have been trained here, and they feel like it's particularly hard for them to be in between two worlds because they don't really have a space in China or in Asia, and they also don't have a space here. And I think it's particularly important for us to create more space for these people because the world needs a new lens to see what contemporary Asian art is.
Great. Amy.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important for us to be curating contemporary Asian art and showing contemporary Asian artists because historically, you know, Asian art has been shown in this kind of maybe perhaps monolithic kind of way as you guys are bringing up. You know, there's a lot of exhibitions that happen where the only unifying aspect is that they are all from, you know, China or something like that, or they're all from Korea. And this is like an issue that's, you know, happened and been discussed a lot, especially over the 2000s. And so I think as those exhibitions continue to happen, there's still, it's important for us to be doing, you know, good work, thoughtful work that's not just, you know, perpetuating a sort of monolithic representation.
Thank you so much. Now it's Q&A. Anybody have a question for us?
So if we can use the mic, that way people online, and I have a couple of questions.
Great, great.
Or people from the metaverse.
Oh, over there.
Hi, thank you for this wonderful talk. I just had a question. I don't know if you can hear from my accent. I'm from Australia. I don't know if the panelists are aware of the White Rabbit Gallery in Australia. It's opened by a woman called Judith Nelson, and she's South African, lives in Sydney, and from my understanding, she has one of the greatest collections of modern Chinese art in the world, right? So I just wanted to ask a question to the panel. What are your thoughts on this, if any, that, you know, one of the greatest, most targeted collections of modern Chinese art is in Australia and probably will be bequeathed to one of the universities in Australia upon her death? So.
Maybe I'll take this one. Right, we're very close to her, and we know her collection, of course. I would say, actually, just a few months ago, we did a re-evaluation of the works that's related to our gallery on her behalf. And I would say her collection is extremely extensive. The variety is probably world's #1, I would say. Of course, each collector focuses on different things. You have the most famous Uli Sig, for example, now the M+ collection. He had a focus, and the DHL collection, of course, had another focus. But Judith, I would say her collection is well-rounded, and she collects really everything from the Chinese contemporary art world. And, you know, echoing what I mentioned in one of the answers, the Chinese contemporary art world is the true melting pot, while she's getting a whole taste of every single spoonful of that melting pot, really.
And just adding on that, I think it's so fantastic. In LA, LACMA, Los Angeles County Museum of Art, has the world's largest contemporary ink collection, and they are donated by 2 European donors. So it is, for me, I think it's such a pleasure that I can go in there and visit these collections. They've been showing them. They started a show, I think, beginning of this year, and they have this 5-year plan of showing them gradually because it's a really huge amount of collection. And the collection features artists from Korea, China, Japan, India, and a lot of other countries. And the artists' work, they're based everywhere in the world. So I really think it's fantastic that these things are happening in the world.
Any other questions?
I'm going to read the one from online. There are 2 questions that have come in from the online audience. One is asking about an older generation of contemporary Chinese artists who came to the U.S. during the 1980s and 90s, and how do you see their work? And the second question, which I'm just going to go ahead and throw out as well, is that traditionally there's an imbalance between male and female artists. Do you see a change in the new generation?
I can take on the first
I
question.
can take the second.
Okay. So yeah, there was actually a huge influx of Chinese contemporary artists. They call them old Chinese artists, but I don't necessarily look at them as old Chinese contemporary artists. And I've actually befriended quite a few of them here in New York. And there were quite a few very influential Chinese contemporary artists moved to the US, New York in particular, during the 80s and 90s. The one thing I wanted to say on this topic is it's really how the artists continue their career. This is what I've been saying all night long, right? You have to have this lifelong practice. I always tell younger artists to not just look at your work by work. You have to look at yourself as one work. That's your trajectory. That's your long-term goal, what you're really practicing and studying and doing. So lots of those artists, they had that strong foundation. And I'm not going to give names here, but it's very interesting to see some of them pivoting to a more safe route, I would say, because they've had certain success in the market. And those are usually the ones represented by the big galleries and trending towards the very safer route. But on the other hand, the ones that weren't as recognized, sometimes you would see them steering their direction into a more adventurous. They would be, more influenced or open to what the New York art market or the Western art market is really, what that's all about. So I've seen different trajectories in how artists, steer their career paths, and it's really a fascinating thing to look at, and it can certainly become one of our curatorial focuses in the future, for sure.
Great answer. I think the second question was about gender binary in terms of artists. As a non-binary person, I have witnessed many of my queer friends who are Asian artists who are thriving. And one of the queer Asian artists is Lu Yang. Their collection is at Asia Society, is right in front of the exhibition room. It's a video game. And the work is very much in discussion of how genderless cyber body can be. And another great queer artist, Asian artist, is sitting right there. That's my friend, Vincent Chen. His work is very much about discovering a genderless, alienated body that is not necessarily registered to gender binaries. If you get a chance, Vincent Yiwei Chen, take a look at him. Any other questions? Barbara.
If I may ask, this panel has been great for me, and I've learned so much, and thank you all of you. But something that bothers me, and I wonder if it bothers you, is that many American art museums their classical Asian collections comes out of colonialism. And now the way they deal with contemporary art is that the contemporary art has to relate back to their permanent collections. And my hope is that as more young Asian curators enter the field, that practice might change. But I'm just wondering if you've noticed this, if it bothers you, and any creative solutions you've come up with dealing with this.
Amy, would you like to answer this?
Oh, I'm not sure if I totally have an answer for this. I mean, yeah, it's a drag that most of these collections, not only like Asian collections, are coming out of colonialism. Like, it's what to do with that, what to do about repatriation. It's like a whole challenging like can of worms. But I think definitely like, trying to paper that over by putting some hot, contemporary artists to engage with this colonial collection is like pretty ridiculous. I don't know, but I don't have a much larger response to that.
Yiwei, do you have any?
I'd like to add on that. So I went to USC, University of Southern California, and we have a museum in Pasadena, Los Angeles. It's called Pacific Asia Museum. And this museum, it was built in the 1910s, 1920s as a private house. And she's a really rich woman. She bought a lot of things during the wars. And most of them are stolen art. So I think till today, we're still talking about if these art is ethical. Are they, where did they get them from? And that's a bigger issue than what we're talking about right now, because there are a lot of stolen art everywhere in the world, and people have been talking about them institutions. Should we return them, or what we should do with them? But what personally disappoints me is that they're still showcasing this collection with a very colonial point of view and very anthropological. They're not really trying to march into the contemporary era. They're not really showcasing a lot of contemporary Asian artists, which I think is a shame, because in California, there are so many Asian people living there. There's a big population. So I think it's time to change. And I feel like Asia Society is doing a really good job. I'm really impressed when I came in here today, because I really wish that's what USC Museum is going to. I have a personal attachment with that museum because I went to USC and I took classes with the director there when I did museum study classes. And that's been a question that came up a lot in our courses. And I asked my professor, do you want to change something here? I'm sure you do. And she said she does, but it's a very institutional problem because it's a university museum. She has to go through all those university levels. We're not getting too political here, but I think it's very difficult, and I really think bigger changes need to happen there.
Since the other two are slightly more negative in taste, I would like to add something that's more positive. Well, first of all, I 100% agree with Barbara, what you said. I second that. I feel that 100% deep to my heart. But there are good examples to be given here. Sometimes when you're tackling the problem, you not necessarily wanted to create a brand new narrative, because that might be too offensive to people, too hard to be conceived to a lot of people. Sometimes you can find a middle ground to make the old appear new, or make the the one thing about contemporary art is it's so versatile. You can merge it into a very good narrative in a way that your older audiences who are used to that older narrative can really start to be groomed into newer viewers. One good example, for example, a good friend, Joanne Cummins, the senior curator at the Brooklyn Museum, she has a really good sort of still older narrative, but fresh look in her take in Chinese contemporary art. In the most recent exhibition, she co-exhibited Ji Yunfei with a few others. That really, the medium-wise, it's still the older taste, but it has this fresh taste in it that you would be able to, I would imagine many older audiences would be able to sort of convert it or re-educate it into the ability to appreciate the new.
I think another great example would be the China Through Looking Glass, one of the Met Gala exhibition. I remember Anna Wintour went to the Forbidden City and borrowed a bunch of Chinese emperor's robes to sit in comparison to, for example, Yves Saint Laurent's qipao. And I think that was a great way to introduce fashion to artifacts. But I also agree that this idea of colonialist way of curating is definitely outdated. There should be a better way to view colonialism and contemporary Asian modernity. But we'll figure that out one day. Any more questions?
Hi, thanks so much for the amazing talk. And I'm a Korean graduate school student at University at Columbia here, and I would love to ask something about art history education or curatorial education. So, what do you think about the current state of Chinese or larger Asian art history here in the U.S. or any related curatorial practices in the education system here?
Yeah, you're looking at me to start because I'm in grad school. I mean, I think that art history as a discipline in general, like not only with Asian art, is just very much behind and very traditional. And so the ways that, you know, art history is even sectioned off in terms of like regional locale and, you know, people needing like a non-Western credit and how that's anything outside of you know, the Western canon. And the fact that like, you know, Chinese art will be its own class and it's like anything from ancient to contemporary or whatever. So I guess, I don't know, in terms of thinking about it in this like, in this, you know, scholarly way, how is Chinese art in, you know, functioning in art history and art history courses? I think it's just, it's a part of this larger problem in art history as being so traditional. And I think that that, you know, drags over to curatorial work and the ways that it's coming from this like anthropological kind of exhibiting practice of, you know, how things are sectioned off and, you know, coming from this way of seeing the culture as like an object of study rather than, you know, as like a culture that, you know, a lot of people are actually a part of. So I don't know if that really answers your question, but you can also chime in too.
I would like to echo this idea of how art history is still so exclusive. And when you talk about Chinese art, for example, within art history setting, most of the time you are thinking classical Chinese art. I remember when I was doing my master's at the Institute of Fine Art, they require us to do a second language requirement. And as a Duolingo speaker, my Chinese wasn't considered as a second language. Italian was, Spanish was, Chinese is not. So we are still looking at a very institutional level of academic racism and the denial of the modernity of Asian art is still very much of a academic problems that need to be solved. When I was studying my master program, nobody was teaching contemporary Chinese art. I have to basically develop my own method of study. So you are not alone, but you are very much alone. Just hang in there. I see someone else, yeah.
You want my question?
Listening online. Sorry about that.
Hi, thank you so much for this amazing talk. My question is because I feel like all of you guys are incredibly privileged to work with young artists. So I wonder what things that strike you the most when working with this generation of young artists compared to maybe people who came over in the 1980s or 1990s, if you have that experience, because I have not engaged with this generation of young artists at all. So that's something that really interests me. So I wonder.
Are you a curator yourself?
I'm not, but want to be, I guess.
Great. You're
So
at
looking
the
for
right
a job,
space.
you know, 5 years down the line, I guess. Yeah, but.
Any one of you? I can go first. I work with one of my favorite artists of our generation is Pixie Liao. And I love her work because she doesn't really talk about the boundary of nations. She doesn't really talk about the usual struggles of, you know, this Asian diaspora aspect of art, but she's just celebrating her existence with her partner. And I think that's very much the mentality of the younger generation's artists, is that we are no longer willing to be limited by any kind of binary system, and we are very much queering the world as we speak. And that's the trend that I'm looking for. Anyone who has the ability to speak not only from a single perspective, from multiple aspects of the world, and having the ability to observe that and express in an artistic language. I think that's the power of the younger generation.
To me, it's braveness. It's not just the braveness to use different tools to create, but it's also the braveness to choose different subject matters. Even though we've talked about many negative things about how identity art is sort of the dominant player right now, but I've seen in the artist studios that I've visited, I've seen artists really brave into the domains that their predecessors have never braved into, being it querying on the world, or the Chinese-ness, or not, or just purely abstractionist. It's also brave to stick to your practice as an abstract painter these days, really. So it's really this braveness in both directions that keep amazing me, and I wanted to see them just really hold on to that aspect and not too scared by anything, because art is really free commentary, and you ought to be brave to do that.
I hope
Those are
that
great.
answered your question.
No, those are great answers. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Hi. First of all, thank you for the talk, and also I do have a question for you because I'm also at NYU right now. So I wonder what's the Asian association you established? I'm just a little bit.
My co-founder is right next to you.
Oh, okay.
Totally.
Oh, we can talk later. But I do have a question, I guess, for everyone. Is that when we talk about Asian contemporary art, what we are talking about? What is it? Because I feel like the definition of it can be very blurred. One artist trained here and doing super abstract stuff, avoid the Chinese-ness or Asian-ness. Then how we define what we're talking about?
I believe the academic definition of contemporary Asian or contemporary Chinese art starts after 1975, I believe.
Or 78,
Oh.
Somewhere. Yeah, somewhere around.
Sorry, I probably should rephrase my question. It's not the time frame, but how we define what is Asian, what is Asian here.
Yeah. Oh, the way to define Asian here is just so incredibly complicated because America is such a hodgepodge of cultures, and as I mentioned earlier, Asianness is not monolithic. Asianness is not just Korean, Japanese, and Chinese. There are so many other beautiful Asian countries and artists from those countries that are super underrepresented. And but it's a big challenge because just simply looking at how Hollywood portrayed Asianness, it's only that 3 categories, right? If the media only see us in 3 ways, how can we really understand the profound intricacies of different cultures? And I think that is very much on the scholars, academics, and curators, gallerists' shoulder to think about and to amplify the voice of those unheard.
Yeah, because a lot of contemporary or Chinese artists got criticized as self-orientalism, and I feel how you understand that part.
I feel like a lot of times Asian artists or Chinese artists, even just queer artists in general, are easily be put into those boxes because people are lazy and people love to generalize things. But I would like to say don't be afraid of those boxes because at least you're being provided with a platform to show your work.
Mm.
That's a very pessimistic way of thinking, but I believe in having one foot into the institutions. If we are saying, then you will have the power of having the conversation. I don't know what would be your...
It's indeed a really tough question, but maybe I can just very humbly propose to you something. Maybe we can not ditch, but make the isms and categorizing secondary and make art comes first. For myself, my undergrad study was in economics. my first art class that I took was an art history book that I read myself as fun reading. So at the end of the day, I would tell my friends that the study of economics and art is exactly the same thing. It's the phenomenology of our society. It's the supply and demand. It's how our globe runs, basically. So I do think there's a fault in over-categorizing and over-isming our history, and that's particularly true in art history, since the education of the academic system needs that, because it can give the teachers the easier time to just give a yes and no, black and white answer. But really, so what I propose is, aside from the things that you're putting into boxes, the isms, the time eras, what about the things that are outside? Are those not art? I would argue those 100% are, and maybe those are even the more beautiful, more romantic art that we've never tried, even attempted to categorize or miscategorize. So this is just my very humble proposal.
Any other response?
That was great.
I hope that answered your question.
What an amazing panel.
Cute.
And I know there's more questions. I was dying to talk about the porousness of performance and live experience of the arts and the greater art world, but that'll be next time. First, join me all in congratulating you all for your vision, for your honesty, and for invigorating all of us to think about curation in new ways.
Thank you.
And a big hand to Barbara for pulling this all together in so many wonderful ways and bringing the art alive. Thank you. So I hope you'll all come back to the Asia Society, come back and see the art, and curators go and revise, revive, and redefine. Thank you all so much.
Thank you. Thank you, guys.